Susan, if you wanted to start, I can go over
Go
a couple of things. So the way we started working together because of the MCA launching a new website. And so the new website had a lot of, as these projects do, goals, some of them competing, some of them aligning, and accessibility was one of the goals there. And so we started talking very early, and the reason I'm pointing this out is because that doesn't often happen. So for those of you who are in the accessibility space, you'll know a couple of different recipes. One of them is we launched 2 years ago, and we really should get on that, you know. So yeah, what are your thoughts on our website? You know, others are, yeah, we totally know that it's inaccessible, but you know, we don't have the funds to deal with it, etc. And yet others are, you know, oh yeah, we're going to be really great. We're going to definitely involve accessibility and usability analysis at the very beginning, about 1 week before launch. Sounds like a good plan. So so that's you know, some things that often happen in space and you know, lead to less than optimal results, right? Because it's the architecture model. If you think about it, at the end, after a family has been living in a house, adding a room is very expensive. If you think about it at the blueprint phase, it costs a little bit of extra money, maybe, but you know, you're talking to the architect, and you don't have to be tearing down walls and redrawing lines and things like that. So same with accessibility. So started working with these guys on the accessibility of the website, and we have some thoughts to share with you on that. And one of the consequences of doing accessibility on a museum website, especially an art museum, is that there's art. And so this art is on the web. And now we have an issue. You can't just say, so, you know, images need to have alt text and have a, you know, that's not a one-liner anymore. When you have 10,000 images, all of a sudden that's a really big commitment. You can't just slip that one by. And so we really started having a serious discussion about images needing to be described. And what does that even mean? What about when it's art? Yeah, okay, we have some very good standards for describing an infographic, like a pie chart, but what does it mean to describe a work of art? And what about different authors having different opinions and bias and so on and so forth? And this led to the creation of a tool here at the MCA called Coyote. So Coyote is nothing more than a web application. It's a web-based application. It happens to actually be accessible, which is a little ironic given what it does. And what it does is the workflow management for describing images, right? So if you have a lot of images, which the MCA does, assigning descriptions to that is a lot harder than just a field in WordPress or a field in Drupal, for example, because there are different languages, perhaps. There are short descriptions and long descriptions. There are multiple descriptions for a single photo. Or the reverse of that problem, the same image being used in different ways across the website, right? Like, oh, in this case, it's just a thumbnail for the restaurant. But over here, it's the actual focus, it's the feature image for the restaurant page. Those might have different meanings. The other thing is that some of you might be thinking, well, you know, when it's used as an icon or a link or a button, that's really important for, let's say, blind users. But what's the point of describing it in other senses? Then it's just decorative, right? We hear this word a lot in accessibility with respect to decorative images. But because it's such a part of the institution, and I'm speaking a little bit for you here, but because it's such a core part of the institution, and the aesthetic, the information content, the actual meaning behind the work that's done here, Susan and Anna rightfully felt that this needs to be really well described. This needs to be part of the core tenets of the usability model of somebody coming to the website. So what we started doing was putting these descriptions into Coyote, and I think I'll let these guys talk about that a little bit. And then what I was thinking was, we can project if we want to, but honestly, I've got a speaker set up here so we can get some good volume. I'm happy to let the screen reader read you guys some descriptions, and I think we have some sample descriptions as well, and you can visit the website on your own device, of course, as well, which would be fine, you know, if you need to use a particular particular assistive technology to interact with it. But maybe before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about just the effect of description with respect to, you know, curation staff and all the awesome different people across the organization that have gotten involved.
Yeah. So as Sina was saying, the task of describing 10,000 images and then doing that on an ongoing basis, and then addressing, you know, the backlog of images is a pretty daunting one. Just to give you context, really, this is really something that, as far as we know, no art museum in this country has taken on and committed to. There are projects, in gallery projects or mobile projects that are, you know, that are accessible and for which images have been described, but nothing on the sort of systematic scale. And so it wasn't as if we were going to be totally, you know, on the hook if we didn't do this, which actually makes it a little bit harder, right? There were some, you know, if the law were pounding down our door, you know, we could sell it. As it is, we were obliged to think about a couple of things. One was selling it to colleagues from throughout the museum. It was pretty clear to me from the very beginning. Sina and I actually disagreed about this. I now recall. When we were first talking about who would do the description, I think that we thought that Sina thought that it needed to be done within my group, which is publishing media, that people who had a certain set of skills would be best to do this. And I'm not cataloging. I mean, I'm a cataloging professional, so I think about those things too. But it didn't seem to me even remotely possible that it could scale. I mean, we're just not a big enough group. And so we snuck around Sina and gathered.
I totally forgot him to do that.
He did. No, but that first meeting that we had with a big room full of people, we kept saying to people, be quiet.
Well, no, there was this
Just
hilarious.
a lot of people.
Yeah, we told him it was going to be 5 people. It was actually this room full of people. And there was this moment where he said, "Can you hear me?" And everyone said, "Yes." And he was like, "Oh no."
But it was, I mean, it was a little scary because I'm afraid of Sina. But also gratifying to see how many people we sent out an email, you know, to the staff and to staff from all over, right? Not just professionals who were involved in creating content, but also visitor services, human resources, a lot of different folks who we thought would be good candidates for doing this work. And the response was really, really robust. And we were asking people to come on their own time, you know, lunchtime, and they did. So that was pretty exciting. And you know, from our point of view, this is the only way that will sustain this. We kind of, Anna was saying at an earlier meeting today that, you know, we did our first writing sessions as a group because this isn't a natural thing necessarily to do, but what we've imagined in our heads is that this is the kind of thing that folks would, you know, on a really boring conference call, they would do some description, or you know, if their lunch hour, you know, has a little extra flex in it, they would do that. So we built the tool to be something that people could sign into from wherever, whenever. We had training from Sina for a couple of sessions, and the training consisted of a little bit of guideline setting, some basic indoctrination about the difference between alt and a long description, but more than anything, a lot of questions that our folks ask that, as Sina says, don't necessarily come up, you know, in other contexts. You know, is a picture of Adam and Eve fleeing the Garden of Eden just two naked people running, or is it actually Adam and Eve? You know, how much a priori knowledge do you assume people have? And you know, really good questions that I have to say, I said this a lot today, we don't have answers to. We're really just beginning to compile questions and begin to think about how institutions and individuals address those. But the group nature of thinking together about description, what is valuable, what works, what is comfortable to do, what yields descriptions that are valuable for end users, that's the piece that we really need to tackle next, is sort of in our sights.
And you have to brag a little. So the number of descriptions that these guys have been able to pull off is, it started after the first spurt, what, 300-400 after the first spurt?
Yeah.
And then it's over 1,000 now?
Well,
1,000
actually,
students?
what was amazing, yeah, it's well over 1,000 now. What was amazing was adding the counter. One of the features I asked Messina to incorporate into the software was a counter, so we could see how many descriptions were in there, how many images were described, to encourage people to keep going.
Oh, there was even gonna be some game theory in there.
Yeah. And then some departments wanted it to be competitive. And anyways, so, but there is a counter. And so once the counter was active, we had another Coyote group writing session. We had laptops set up. It was in this room again, set up all around the room, and everyone was writing in pairs. And I was just refreshing the homepage of Coyote every 15 minutes, and we were watching the number go up. And in an hour, we went from 300 or 400 to over 1,000.
Wow.
And now we're over 1,000 and counting.
Of which a very large number are unreviewed because the people who are supposed to be reviewing are super lazy.
And sitting to either side of me. But that does bring up a good point about the review process. So I mentioned workflow earlier, but kind of casually and didn't define it. So this idea of, putting descriptions on images is one thing, having it really be, again, going back to having accessibility live, I've said this a couple of times today, having accessibility live as a first-class citizen as part of projects here, projects plural, means that these descriptions get edited. The content matters. I've seen a lot of websites, and I'm sure you guys have too, where I love, actually, my most favorite is accessibility being misspelled. Usually there's a C or an S missing, and screen readers say it funny, which is ironic. That's right. But that's part of the process here that Susan, just the amount of passion and care that goes into digital media here also goes into the accessibility quality, the quality of the content for accessibility. And the descriptions, actually, so you have one?
Yeah.
Do you want to read?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So we'll have Anna, I can have a screen reader do this as well, and you guys can go to mcachicago.org, and a lot of the graphics there are the alts. Oh, one quick note for the folks familiar with short and long description. Right now, just for now, and I'll explain why I'm saying this in a second, the long descriptions, the lengthier ones, if you will, they are stored as the alt text of the image. Yes, we definitely know that alt text is traditionally done, 120, maybe 200 characters or less. But the reason we did that was for maximum compatibility, and then later on, in future cycles and iterations of the development cycle for the website, we're actually going to roll out, I can talk about that, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, cool. We're going to roll out a feature whereby we're making visible, and I mean that in every sense of the word, not only to screen reader users, but also to every user who can see and whatnot, the long descriptions and the short descriptions of these images. And the reason that matters is because of something Susan always brings up, which is when you start talking to people about this stuff, and you start talking to them about describing it, or whether, just the fact that this stuff exists, you say, oh, I want to see that. And right now, it's mainly accessible to, using a screen reader, or if you toggle some things in your browser, but we want to make sure that that's exposed to all users accessibly. So sure, it'll still be, some short descriptions, it's alt, and a nice widget to expose the longer descriptions for keyboard users, but also for mouse users and everybody as well, so that everybody can benefit from those descriptions.
Because they're ostensibly just, it's close viewing of an artwork, and that's been the most exciting part. It opens up these artworks. So I'm going to read a description written by a curator at the MCA of a painting. I will perhaps show it, we can decide. And this is a long description. This painting, a realistic portrait, depicts a young African-American woman in a stylish orange coat. In the lower right corner of the image, she holds a thin paintbrush in her hand, alongside a flat palette covered with thick dabs of paint in a variety of colors. The square composition centers on her face and upper body, and she looks directly out at the viewer with a calm but commanding gaze. At first, the dark black hue of her skin almost blends in with the black wall that is directly behind her on the left. But her dark complexion also contrasts with the white background of a partially finished painting that appears behind her on the right. Gradually, it becomes evident that she is painting a self-portrait using a paint-by-numbers system. On the easel beside her, the figure's face and body are divided up into smaller shapes, each one outlined in light blue. She has filled in a few of them already with bright orange or mint green from her palette, but she isn't strictly following the actual colors of her own appearance.
So Anna said heard, it's not actually how our curators write.
Oh,
Good
point. Not at all. Not at all.
It is actually, I worked, before I came here, I worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we had a phrase that we used, and it was always said disdainfully, which was that what you know, this is a terrible, terrible text. It's art history for the blind. Which is to say, it said exactly that. You know, the sky is blue, the grass is green. You know, the pretty girl is lying on the beach. It is purely descriptive, and that was considered to be somehow lesser because it wasn't interpretive, it wasn't scholarly, and it didn't contain research.
As opposed to something which I might call rather useless from a vision point of view, which is that we can experience in this rich, plethora of colors the artist's youthful age. So get zero information.
But understand that Carsten, who wrote this, would have been raised, to disdain art history for the blind, just that kind of description. And he has been one of our most enthusiastic participants because he has found in doing this some value for his practice that has, in forcing him to empathize with the point of view of somebody who doesn't come to works of art with knowledge that, has been gained over years and years and years of study. And it's been really exciting to watch him sort of embrace the idea that there are things to be said in simple description of this sort that might actually be as valuable as, as the writing that he does that takes, 5 years of research. And so we're really excited about how this work is not only something that is going to bring value to our users and then users, our visitors, but also is really helping our staff to think about what we do and why.
And also not only to help the staff, but to help someone who has great 20/20 vision, right? And can see the painting just fine, and then might read the description here and say, you know what, I never noticed X, Y, and Z, right? I never actually picked up on X, Y, and Z, and that is a really enriching experience, not only for someone who might be experiencing it for the first time, but there's this, the gaming world, you would call it replay value, right? So there's this quality, though, of using accessibility and inclusive design to increase the replay value of visiting an art museum and experiencing these works of art. Yeah, sure, you can still see it again, and you might get something different out of it, of course, because that's one of the essences of art. But having this description almost repositions you to appreciate that visual information, even if you can see, in a different way.
And this is part of the reason why when we built Coyote, it was important for us to allow for multiple descriptions, which again is one of those, it's kind of sacrilegious.
Yep.
In this institution, there should be a kind of, absolutely the right description. And I don't believe in that, but it's really difficult to change a culture that sort of strives for an absolute, perfect. And so this is one of the reasons, by the way, because I realized it sounded kind of icky that I was saying that, we have to have these things, they have to be edited, and there have to be, subjects and predicates, because Sina suggested that we could do without verbs.
No, it's articles.
That was articles? Oh, okay, not verbs. Oh, yeah, definitely without verbs. Also without articles. But
For short, just to be clear. Don't totally throw me on the
part of
For short.
Yes, for short descriptions. Fair enough. But part of the reason that we're being a little bit cautious about the editorial piece of this is that I am a little bit afraid that we're just beginning to change the culture again toward these. It's okay for a visitor services staff to describe something because they spend all of this time talking to visitors and trying to understand what they want to know, what they don't see. This is the kind of interaction that the curators don't have, and so they bring that experience to the description, and it's pretty exciting to see the ways that the different members of the MCA team are learning from each other about our interaction with the public. And that was an unexpected side
wanted to phrase this a little bit more as a discussion, so without raising your hand, because that's useless for me, but, you know, any questions on that?
Could you just tap your chest?
Or just speak up, I guess there's so many burning questions, but any questions or comments on stuff we've talked about so far?
I have a few, well.
I have a couple too.
No, I think as long as, so I'm totally commandeering, but you guys okay with that, to just pause a little bit?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so why don't we, I'm being arbitrary here, but you spoke up first, so in the front and to my right, which is your left.
Have any of your artists objected to defining, describing their work? My daughter's a choreographer, and she will not say what it means.
We recently published a little factoid about the number of works in our collection that have the title untitled. It's a very significant number.
21%.
Wow.
And we
Contemporary art.
published alongside it a sort of note that artists frequently will title something untitled so as to allow, for interpretation on the part of the viewer. So yeah, I mean, that's one reason that artists might object to.
That was my point.
Right, but
Is this an
the
issue?
other reason is that we might frankly be wrong. We haven't heard it yet, but then we haven't been engaging with them. I suspect that absolutely that'll happen. But I also think that, there'll be plenty who don't mind, and this is what you have to do. You
And
just
the
play
artist.
with it.
And
Yeah.
who are,
Exactly.
I mean, so Anna has a really good story. I mean, if you want to tell it, that you were
About the painter?
the painter, he had them.
Yeah. So Sina, got us all thinking about this all the time, and the process of describing, and so
They actually think about accessibility more than I do.
possibly true.
Well, because we're learning, I think.
Right.
Yeah, we're learning, and
That's awesome.
we're voraciously consuming information. So one of the things I do here at the museum is the video production, overseeing the video production. And so we were interviewing Jack Whitten, who actually has a show at the Walker right now. I think it's still up, and is in our collection. And so he was in town, and we wanted to interview him while he was in town about the piece of art in our collection, which is painting. It's a very abstract painting, and I thought, as an exercise, I'll ask him to describe his own painting. Like, just what are the colors? What is the, how would you describe this to someone who couldn't see it? And he did a sort of very, poetic physical description of the painting, but immediately digressed into this story of, bringing tears to his eyes of having an exhibition where he gave permission to the registrars to let people touch his paintings, and so a wine tour came through and they were able to touch his paintings and feel all of the surfaces, because there are these very flat swaths of paint that have been, he calls it a developer, that he drags across the canvas that makes the colors blend together in a peculiar way, and there's a hard stop at the end, so there's a bit of texture, and so there's this smooth surface with all kinds of drawings made into the surface until you hit the edge. And it was a really, to hear an artist open up and talk about their work in a way that they wouldn't normally in an interview. It was fantastic. And so these kinds of experiences are constantly opening up here.
We have all of these fantasies. We had this idea that we might combine these descriptions with sign language, which we're learning about because, again, just beginning to learn. And as we meet signers who are especially dramatic, because they all seem to be destined for the theater, we had this idea that it would be really kind of cool to see these descriptions acted out, or at least signed. There's a lot to it that allows us to think about interpreting pictures in many, many dimensions that we just weren't expecting. Because honestly, most museums think this is the dullest thing you could possibly do with your time.
We're changing that.
We're changing that.
We had some questions in the middle, I think.
Oh, I had a question. I was just very interested, you had mentioned that you got a really good response when you sent out emails. And I'm wondering, my immediate thought was, you got that really good response, probably because all of your people are very engaged and very proud of the place that they work. Would you say that that would be the case?
Yes, but I don't think that they're necessarily, you're going to assume that they're proud because it's an art museum or because they're inherently creative, and I think there's a lot of that. But I think that there's also this sense of people who work in nonprofits are often in it because they want to be in a place that is just doing good. And I think that the accessibility aspect of this, serving underserved, communities, offering something that, to people who we have basically closed our doors to in the past, because, to hear Sina talk about it, there's not a lot for a blind person, in this building, is something that a lot of them respond to totally independent of the art.
Mhm.
And to be, just to set the stage here, like, the first time, it wasn't all, oh my goodness, ramp up to 500 descriptions and then 1,000. There was one spreadsheet Anna sent out, I think, and it was to elicit responses. This is when the software was still being developed, so that flow didn't exist. So they just wanted to gather it in a spreadsheet. And it came back empty, like zero, right? So it really is a story about going from 0 to 60. It's not just everything was sunflowers and meadows from day one. But I think part of that was just nothing to do with accessibility. To be honest with you, it's basic social engineering. Get people involved, get them involved in groups, do the partner exercises, have descriptions be meaningful. So when we had conference calls and they were describing things, they were right there. One of the things that I remember really clearly from those calls is that folks would read the descriptions that they had authored, and it was really cool. And when they were reading it, there honestly was very little, at least I felt, maybe they were just looking really angrily at the speakerphone, so Susan can tell me. But, I didn't really feel a lot of pride of ownership, right? Like, in the bad sense of that word. In other words, like, I don't care if you can't see it, it's my awesome description. It was a lot more like, wow, I never thought about mentioning her race before. Or, that's really interesting. Should we use the word naked or should we use nude? And what are the implications therein? What if it's an erotic painting? Then what do you know? So like there were all of these really interesting discussions that came out of actually thinking about this for the first time sincerely. So I think the property, at least for me, the thing that I appreciate most about this particular group of people, a lot of whom are not in the room right now, is the ability to bring deep thought to something, to take it seriously, and then everything else stems from there, in my opinion.
And I mean, Sina just demonstrated another factor, which is having the trainings with Sina, and that means therefore connecting people with someone who can directly praise them and thank them was a huge factor, because we had a room full of people working together. They do some descriptions, and then Sina would end every call with, and by the way, like,
You guys
not
are
as a
doing.
consultant,
Yeah.
thank you. And I think that is such a huge motivator. I mean, you could feel the other kind of pride in the room.
Right.
Yeah, and we were talking earlier, just to sort of pile on the training note, and this is not specific to Coyote, in fact, it's not about Coyote at all, but we were talking to somebody from the Park Service about the nature of Sina's consultancy with us, and why it had worked. And I think it's kind of worth repeating what we said to him, because he was asking, well, how did that work? And we were remembering that the very first deliverable for Sina when we hired him was to engage with our developers who actually had not had any accessibility training, and he trained them and then was available to them, and was really, really important part of our being able to make the site accessible, but B, integrate Coyote with the site. And not that all of that's perfect or done yet, but making available the knowledge so that it wasn't hard and intimidating.
And the other advantage of that, right, there's an emergent effect that happens there, which is that those developers don't only develop for the MCA, right? It's not an in-house team. And so what happens is that on future projects, I already know for a fact that they've written some little helper libraries for themselves, little JavaScript things that they used to do all the time, that they now do differently, because why not? It looks the same, but happens to be way more accessible. There's a couple of things like that, things that they're integrating into their workflow, like automatically checking for a few accessibility things here and there, that they're applying to other projects. And it goes even further than that, because institutions like the MCA, there's several other clients of mine that do this as well. If you start letting them know, and by the way, this one library you're using, it's open source, and you've already solved this problem because you had to for you, giving back and publishing that back into the community helps everyone else who is now using that thing, sometimes knowingly and sometimes unknowingly. They'll just say, oh yeah, I use, blah, 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 video player or whatever, and they don't even realize that, oh yeah, the buttons are now tabbable for somebody who can see perfectly fine, but keep it because they can't move a mouse. And that, I think that's a neat contribution that comes out of work like this. Any other questions?
This is Jen. Could you back up a couple of steps in time and tell us a little bit more about the origin story of this effort? I'm so curious about
So it's actually
how this came to be.
Hold on, you always get to tell this one.
April. It's not, I mean, the origin story is not backed up very much. Yeah.
So,
Doesn't it
Okay,
back
I
to
don't
when we first met Sina in a way?
well, so I remember it very
Okay.
clearly. I actually remember exactly where I was and how I was holding my phone, which is weird, but I also remember because I got really excited and I threw it across the room, which, was great. But basically we were talking about images, and I remember actually being on Susan's part, which is that I was a little reluctant. I was like, guys, so here's the deal. I'm gonna lay this out for you.
Oh, yeah.
And what you're saying, because Susan was very much doing her usual, which is like, forget bare minimums and even average. We're gonna be, like, what's after AAA? Let's be quiet. And like, so,
And I'm
okay.
like, guys, think about
Deadline.
deadlines.
Right, so you want to
Yeah.
describe, every image in there? And they're like, yeah, totally. We're not going to do it right now. It might take 5 years. But yeah, why not? Let's commit. I'm like, so then there was a pause where I go, sure. And they're very affirmative about that. So then the next step is, well, how do we do that? And that's kind of where, Coyote started coming up, because I was pointing out to them, every museum has their own objects collection management system and TMS and all these other things. And what do you want to do about storing all of these descriptions? And that's where we started, again, that deep thinking thing, which I really appreciate about MCA. We immediately started going to, what about different languages? What about the multiplicity of voices, as Anna calls it, where it's this idea of having different descriptions per image. So that's where Coyote kind of came about as not only a workflow tool, but a repository, if you will, to hold these different kinds of descriptions in a programmatically accessible way.
Yeah.
So that the website could draw from it.
And we egg each other on, which is
Yes.
sometimes a problem. So immediately as we began to think about the repository, we saw it as a research tool on top of everything else. This is an emergent practice, and there are lots of different ways that you formalize practice. But one of them, and one of them is just a bunch of people sitting around talking and saying, should you really describe the skin color of the subject in a painting? But the other is really taking a big data set, which we began to see we could collect and especially aggregate with other people's data and study and analyze. And so part of the project we haven't talked about, but that we absolutely see in the future. And maybe we won't do that work. Maybe somebody else will come along and grab our data set and do work on it. Or maybe we'll look at some pieces and others will look at other pieces. But it was important to us almost immediately to think about a rigorous method for storing and organizing the information so that they could be studied by someone, hopefully us.
And actually, that's another factor of the workflow that helps the commitment, I think, of all these people, is that everyone can see each other's descriptions in the software. So you're not like out alone in the dark trying to describe your image in your lunch break, like, oh, I think it might be. You can look at how other people are describing to get a little courage of like, oh, okay, so-and-so did it that way, that's interesting, I'd do it this way. And you can add to each other's. So there is still this community basis to the way the data is collected. and shared.
I'm not sure we have actually said that it's our intention for the software to be available to anybody.
Yes.
And that, we're not really ready for it to be fully deposited. But that we are happy for you to be in touch with us if you have a thought to using it at some point. But also, we can give you a login, so you can take a look. There's no reason you can't have that.
Yeah.
So you can poke around a bit, and, sort of see what it looks like. It does, it does actually work. It pulls images needing description from our site, and it pushes descriptions back out. Basics.
Once approved,
Once approved,
which is why we'll let you in.
yes, you can put anything you want in there, but I'm never gonna get around to the,
So could we describe one if we wanted to?
Absolutely, please do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, if you think you might start describing, we'll give you your own log.
Your own log. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if you're interested in doing that, and again, Susan was talking about eventually open sourcing this and so on and so forth, but in the meantime, if you are interested in that at all, even if it's only one, right?
Yeah.
Seriously, just give it a whirl. And please get in touch. We're all going to be here.
Oh, yeah. Well, considering I started my college career in painting and printmaking, so I'm particularly interested.
That's
so.
awesome.
And I really want to see the painting that,
You want to display it?
Yeah.
I have a visual image in my head, and I want to see if
I
I'm
was
right.
waiting for someone to ask for it.
Oh, kind of what I pictured.
So
It's really great with the lights.
terrible. It's actually, if you come back anytime soon, it's in our lobby right now.
Oh.
It is a painting by Harry James Marshall, the great Chicago painter, whose retrospective we're mounting in April. I'm just plugging because. And the show is organized by us, but it's going on to the Met and to the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art. It's really good, yeah. So,
I have friends coming from all over to
Yeah.
see it here.
yeah.
It's gonna
And to
be
see it
great.
here, because Carrie's been very involved in things like that here. It is interesting because his paintings, which are representational, not realistic, but representational, are also very, very complex and, politically motivated in many ways, or at least ethically motivated in a lot of ways. And there's a lot here that is not in the visuals. And we're not trying to do all of that, but it's very, very difficult. This is one of yourself, to not talk about, the question of the representation of Black people in art here, because it's all there in what he's put on the canvas. But, blind people actually have access to all of that scholarship and research. They just don't have access to, the colors are orange and, brown and, the composition is this. So we're not trying to do everything with it.
It was it's funny reading the description, because I was reading.
It's not the one you would have written.
It's not the one I
Yeah.
would have written, but it's also interesting how on a reading it again and again, now I'm sort of seeing the hints at various meanings in the description
Yeah.
that I didn't
Yeah.
think the description had. I was sort of like, wow, he really managed to leave out all this political information. I'm like, oh
She
yeah,
has
she
music
isn't following
painting, yeah.
strictly. I was like, oh, nice choice of words.
And
Yeah.
just kind of the things, the description matches the painting in some way, I guess. How would I say this? I don't know, it's just when you said
Voice.
paint by
Yeah,
numbers.
yeah.
The voice, the tone of the description matches the painting.
Mhm.
When she said paint by numbers and then you started with African American, those just two things stood out to me immediately, saying, okay, there's something going on there. But there was no overt political statement or
Yeah.
anything like that. But I said that means something, so.
There's much more in these than people expect from visual description as
Mhm.
we've been taught it should be. And I think this is the thing that surprised us, that not only could that be done, but also that we could live with it. That Sina didn't say, well, no, that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be all cold and clinical. You you use these kinds of words and you have to describe in this order. We were all a little surprised in our first trainings that there weren't more rules, that it wasn't, that it didn't need to be more structured, that this could be of service in some way or another. And, you know, so you really challenged us to think about how we wanted these descriptions to express our values and not, you know, not some abstract idea of a standard. And so I'm not sure that there might not be other people out there in the accessibility community who would say, well, this is way too Wild West for me.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I mean, for sure. I mean, especially with art, I think the immediate, I mean, I've talked with several folks about this project without mentioning it and things like that, you know, just to gauge opinions over drinks and things like that. And basically, a lot of it is immediate dismissal, right? Not because of the value. I think the value proposition is like really clear. Oh, yeah, totally. I totally agree that art museums' content should be described, etc. But what they come back to is, well, you know, art is so, you know, it's just so subjective, right? So, like, why bother? Like, you've been in accessibility for 20 years. Come on, like, what are you talking about? So, and that's I think that's the reaction that is not happening here. You know, we kind of fast forwarded past the why bother into the how, and it turns out that the how involves an incredible amount of richness in the tale that you don't usually get with, you know, you can write scripts basically to describe mathematical diagrams, right? It's very
You can
straightforward.
actually write scripts to describe many representational paintings.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you describe the subject and, you know, a little bit of the form and the color, yeah, and I mean, there's rules for this. But the thing is that then you lose a lot. And the other real thing is then why bother, you know, looking at the MCA's description, right? And I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, one of my pet peeves is, actually came up earlier today, and it's something that comes up a lot, which is that, well, blind people don't go to art museums anyway. I'm like, that's true. Whose problem is that? And you know, you should work on that, right? As opposed to blind people don't go to art museums anyway. Let's move on to the next thing, right? So I'm trying
Right.
to get that to be you know, a thing, and I think it involves the other side as well. I think that as I talk with more of my friends who are blind or more of my friends who have other disabilities, getting them to realize that just because museums were inaccessible in the past traditionally, and you know, I can say that, that doesn't mean that they have to be going forward. So
I spoke at an event at the Goodman Theater this fall that was hosted by ADA 25. It was a cultural accessibility summit. And one of the other speakers was a blind lady. And I read a description of a work that we had installed at the time of a hot air balloon that was all blown up and you could go inside of it.
that's my favorite.
It's a great description. And she, at the end of the summit, there were, you know, she was on stage doing some closing remarks, and she said, you know, and somebody asked her this question, what you know, you're a writer, what do you do with your time? It just seemed a little weird, but, and she gave a beautiful answer about all the things that she does. But then she said, you know, and you know, I don't go to museums very much because, you know, I don't really feel a warm welcome. But I have to say that after hearing that description of that hot air balloon, I'm going to the MCA. And I thought, wow, we just totally won the day. Magnificent. And she did come, actually. She came and was escorted through the hot air balloon by one of our visitor services staff, the whole 9 yards. So.
Any other questions or comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So it sounds like Coyote's proprietary to MCA.
No.
No,
No.
just right now, but
We're just
seriously,
going- no, no,
the plan is
absolutely.
totally, you know, let's agree on license, throw it on GitHub, the whole
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
So then the next question, what other applications do you see for something like this?
For Coyote itself or for the descriptions? 'Cause
The descriptions.
Yeah, we have lots of ideas. First and foremost, Sina is going to divorce us as our consultant if we don't find a way to make them available within the gallery space. So that, you know, basically somebody who wants to, you know,
Wants to come here
Right.
physically.
Yeah, I mean, because that's so easy to do, right?
It's just the next step.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, they will be very, very useful in gallery interactives.
Mhm.
We, you
You
know,
already have like the headsets and the
you know?
Right.
What I'd love to see is a whole sort of culture of those descriptions being available in Chicago, so that you could, so that people can expect, it's expectation, right, that causes, that grows our audiences. So if you know that you go to a place and there are gonna be these descriptions, you'll look for them. We are, I think there's just a ton to be done with them, and some of it not by us. So our goal would be to make these descriptions available for, folks to use themselves. If you're a teacher, if you are if you're a researcher, whatever.
We had one of our colleagues in Baltimore invite some art history students, right? That traditional training that Susan was talking about. The professor sent a couple of students. This is, you guys have been following the weather. Baltimore had this insane blizzard. They were just silent. So they had 15 people scheduled to come from this art history class. 5 of them still came during all the snow and everything. And they showed up, and they spent a little bit of time, again, receiving very similar training, not anywhere near as much as done here. And they went through and they described a couple of images. And they did some post surveys, how did you find this experience? Would you come again? Would you tell a friend? Positive across the board. But then the professor wrote back to our colleague and said the next day or the next week, something like that, she took them to another thing, another museum, or it was an art thing where they were trying to do critical analysis of art, and every single one of them at different points in time actually independently brought up description as one of the things that they thought about during that experience, even though it wasn't an accessibility thing or anything along those lines. And the reason I'm telling this story is because I'm really into, I don't know if you're familiar with Randy Pausch in the last lecture, but one of the concepts that he has in there is the head fake. And so confirmation bias is a beautiful tool if you're trying to manipulate people into thinking, oh my God, this is the most delicious pizza. But it's also an awesome tool if you just have 20 people come up and say, hey, are these accessibly described? And eventually humans start behaving as, wow, this should totally be accessibly described. And it works way better than thou shalt or you must do this thing. It almost changes the framework of thinking about things into, wait, why isn't it? Like whenever you want somebody to do something, don't ask them, can this be done? Ask them how this can be done. You've already taken no off the table. You should start from there. So that's one of the strategic goals I have for it. But then also, you can name it, Twitter, crowdsourcing, mobile, indoor navigation, delivery of images across institutions, descriptions that actually do embody multiplicity of voices, integration with Wikipedia bots. This is like multilingual, look how specific. Descriptions on demand for different services. If you guys are familiar with the Be My Eyes app, for example, right? So you turn it on, you can either sign up as a describer or somebody who wants things described. There's so many things like that you can start delivering accessibility and therefore inclusive design as a service that helps everybody that I see. And the software is just, to me, technology is just a tool. I'm into technology. My background is computer science, but it's just a way of getting stuff done. It's just a really, cool way to add that multiplication factor or that force augmentation factor. But I don't know if that answers your question.
No, definitely, thank you.
I have a question. So, since you developed the software, can you talk a little bit about the accessibility of it?
Sure.
And
So-
how it integrates with the website?
Yeah,
and
sure.
How does that integration work?
So, is your background development, like technology?
Well, I'm somewhere between that.
Okay.
I'm not a developer, but
Okay.
I have a technical background.
Okay, understood. So I'll just give you an overview, and then I'm happy to talk with you offline about it. But basically, it's a web application. It's written in Ruby on Rails. It has a JSON API. It's a RESTful API that can be pulled to and pushed to. It's able to maintain state across instances. Of course, it's backed by a database, and it pulls from the MCA's content management system. So it gets a JSON dictionary, right? It goes through. It says, oh, I don't know about this unique ID. That's an undescribed image, and then it just puts that into the workflow and says, this should be described, and then that becomes an entity in the system, right? So now that entity gets all of these descriptions. And then on the reverse side, right, on the flip side, the website can go, ooh, I got an image here. I'm gonna programmatically, right? I'm gonna store the alt text for it, I'm gonna go ask it for it, I'm gonna go ask Coyote for it. And that's really important, because if you think about it, that can change. Susan might approve another description, or Anna might go in and say, oh, we got a spell check, we got a spelling thing here, we gotta fix that. And so you wanna make sure that that's done dynamically. You're not just storing it as a flat description. As far as the accessibility of the software, it's an interesting question, because you're asking, is the software used primarily to describe undescribed definitions, right? By definition, is that accessible? We tried really hard to make that the case, right? So appropriate use of ARIA where possible. WCAG 2.0 AA was kind of the standard there. Buttons, not link styled as buttons. Table navigation where tables are actually useful, not just because it's easy to lay things out that way. Proper use of headings and ARIA live regions for announcing pop-ups and things like that. So the whole 9 yards as far as all that goes. I use the system myself, and I'm obviously a screen reader user, and I can use it just fine.
Great, thanks.
But for other disabilities as well, right? Because
Although
I don't want to just make it about blind.
Describe images for,
Yeah, that's a different problem. That's the computer vision problem.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions?
Does the MCA have tactile versions of images?
that's of works. So, so tactile,
I mean,
technology.
here, obviously, not on the web.
Yes, no, of works in the collection. We don't have any. It is, it's not something, we would really love to be an institution that had, that has accessibility programs of all sorts. Touch is a tricky one, and I have to say that I'm not so inclined to love tactile reproduction, but I'd love to have touch tours, for example. I think that I've worked in museums that do magnificent touch tours. It's something that is really uncomfortable for our registration team. They're pretty conservative, and we, like many small museums, don't have huge security staff to manage kind of an understanding of what can be touched and what can't be. And so we take a really conservative approach to touching anything in galleries.
Except I realized the Plaza project, which,
Oh, yes, of course.
it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the one thing
Yeah.
we can touch.
Well, that, and actually, I think that one of the interesting things that happens in Chicago is there's some really good tours for the blind that are architecture focused. And I would really love to see us have a touch tour based on the architecture of this building, which is sort of an important architectural space.
I also think that there's other aspects to it. So when we talk about replicas, especially tactile, right, there's a resolution problem there. When we are talking about the swirling of colors, it's really easy to immediately jump to, well, not a problem. Here's what you do. You take the colors and you map them to different textures, and then you take those different textures and you use elevation, et cetera, et cetera. But it turns out that, through neuroscience and other things, we actually know a little bit about how much the fingertip can feel and things like that. And it's not as easy as mapping those things up. A lot of times with tactile graphics, my frustration actually as a user, but also as somebody with a background in this stuff, is that you'll get a tactile graphic, and it will look, and I'm using that word visibly, it will look gorgeous. Seriously, it's a work of art. I mean, some of these tactile graphics are incredible. They are, the line spacing is just really good. You can see it, and you're like, wow, this is awesome. And if you then give that to someone who's blind, and we actually do this in a controlled study type of environment, you realize that the information content is kind of not there, right? They might get some general appearances and things like that, but it's because those spacings are appropriate for vision, but they're not appropriate for tactile. So when you actually want to really do a tactile replica correctly, and it is doable, I don't want to say it's not. I was in Pittsburgh at the Andy Warhol Museum, and they have a tactile replica of the soup can, right? The most iconic, probably Warhol. It's really cool. It's really easy to tell that is a Campbell soup can, and it's like 3 feet high and whatever, pretty close to scale. They have another one that he did, which is a side profile of, I think it's a few people, I don't remember, it might just be a woman in a car, and it's an old style car from like the 1920s or whatnot, maybe the 40s, and it's this like side view, it's very elongated, and that one's a lot harder to tell what is going on until it's pointed out to you. and again, it's just having to do with the, you know, the Campbell soup can has a lot of empty space. It really gives you that ability to move your finger around and do, use proprioception appropriately. So I don't want to make it sound like an impossible problem, because I've got some friends who do some amazing things with 3D printing and tactile graphics and things like that. But it's hard, you know, it's a hard problem.
This is Jen again. How did you get buy-in and funding to do this?
We didn't.
There you go.
She's very
So, you know, so my philosophy is that, well, one of my philosophies is that you should, if you say something enough times, it becomes a truth. So Anna and I started saying around the museum, hey, we're really leading the community in being about accessibility. You know, this is an institution that has committed to accessibility. Well, first of all, when Sia was talking about the house that you're building and how much more expensive it is to build the addition, it's also much easier when you're building the house to swallow the cost of that extra room. You don't sort of notice it in the big numbers. So of course we were just building a website, and so we just frankly, Dennis, we just, you know, nobody noticed that there was accessibility funding.
There's a line.
Yeah, there's a line.
There's a lot in the budget for the new website.
And it's all fairy dust anyway, technology, right? But in terms of this institution's commitment to accessibility in the digital space, honestly, we said it a lot of times, and now other people say it too. And I just think that works for me virtually every time. That's how I got my husband, you know. No.
You're going to hate me for saying this, but you just laid out the Donald Trump model of accessibility.
Oh, no! Wait, that's not true. Yeah.
No, he's just copying her.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I think it's really, really tough, because we were saying earlier, you know, you can't say the word. People have all of these, you know, these biases against, you know, you just kind of have to start doing stuff.
You know, Tim Cook has a quote, the CEO of Apple, right? He has this thing where he was at a stockholder meeting, and one of their larger institutional investors, they have millions of shares of Apple stock, was giving him a really hard time about data centers and about, you know, green energy and all this other stuff, right? And so he just keeps hounding the guy, and Tim finally, and for those of you who know, he's a very quiet, soft-spoken, very calm individual, doesn't lose his cool ever, and he just like finally gets mad at the guy and is like, look, if you don't like it, you know, feel free to exit the stock. But he also says when we do stuff like that, green energy or accessibility, we do it because it's the right thing to do, and I don't consider the bloody return on investment. Now, the reason I bring it up is it's awesome. It's like, yay, you know, Fortune 500 company, definitely, you know, doing some awesome stuff and doing it for the right reasons. But here's the reality. The actual reality, the business reality for Apple is that they've made money off of accessibility. And sure, they've invested hundreds of thousands, probably by now they've invested millions actually in accessibility. They've made tens of millions off of that, from education to a lot of other initiatives. Even their kiosk mode, in fact, the kiosk mode that museums use is an accessibility feature, right? And they use it for different reasons, but it's fantastic for children with autism and other users with autism. So it's one of those things where if you take a multitude of these kinds of social engineering, saying it a lot, everything else, and then also realize that accessibility doesn't have to be phrased as a cost center, you can get very far. And I've seen that now be successful at several different museums, several different startups, one venture fund, and a couple of larger corporations, and then universities are a lot easier, because universities have that mandate, right? So for them, that's not so much of an issue. But all of those other ones I listed, you know, that model seems to work.
And I actually have no doubt that with the position that we've taken on accessibility, that it won't be a cost center for us in this sort of traditional sense. There's funding to be had for the work that we're doing. We're 100% positive. But making that argument, you know, before you start is a whole lot harder than making that argument when you've started a little. I mean, and honestly, from, you know, as much as we've done, I feel like we started a little. So, you know, but just enough to begin to realize, funding and, that sort of value to reputation and all of that good stuff that nonprofits like. So,
Honestly, it's becoming quite hip.
yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's so cool right now. I was talking with a friend about description, and she got so excited. She's a choreographer, filmmaker, and she's like, I've been doing description. And I was like, what do you mean? She was living in Berlin and took some workshop with a dancer, and they were doing description as choreography. And that led her to take a description course. So she took a course in live description and has been super into description. I mean, it's like crazy. It's now like everywhere. I had another friend do a performance. She's an artist out in San Diego, and it turned out she was doing these description-based performances and not even realizing that there was this whole other world. And now is super excited and gets certified to do description for video. And it's like weird that it's become this very hip thing, which actually makes it so much easier to move things forward.
Hip for artists, but also hip for funders. I was
Yep.
saying in a meeting earlier that, 8825 helps us a lot in terms of awareness on the part of funders, I think. And, that sort of changes everything. We, of course, are pairing something that's inherently sexy, right? Art with, with something that's now trendy, accessibility. So, we get a little bit of a heads up. We're not trying to make, a an oil company's, website accessible. So it helps us with the funders, but I actually don't think there's really that much of a difference in terms of, the sort of willingness of people to put something into this.
It is trendy, right? And it's cool, and I think that there are a lot of people, especially there's a huge artist community, even locally here to Chicago. Like, have you guys thought at all about engaging with that network of people at all, just to see if they could contribute to doing the descriptions and
We absolutely have. We want to have a tool that's finished before we.
right? I'm putting the cart before the horse.
No, but we think about it a lot, and which communities would be interested, and how would we engage with them. I said something super insensitive at the very beginning of the process, which is, I wonder if deaf people would be interested in helping us to describe. And today, somebody who's a representative of the deaf community came up to me and said, "We'd really like to help you describe." I was like, oh, well, that's good. Thank you. We are, as I said, we have been in conversation with the Poetry Foundation about that community. I really do think that this museum has a really, really important relationship with local artists that we would love to tap, but also local arts professionals, teachers and the like. There's so many possibilities for us, and we just we want people to feel as fulfilled in participating as our staff do. I think that you don't want to let folks down, so we're moving more slowly than we would want to, but really with the best of intentions.
Yeah. I mean, it would be so easy to just share it with everyone
Exactly.
and then have it sort of just flop out into like something that everyone forgot about. So we're being very, very careful about, is it ready for this next phase?
Actually, to be fair, the kinds of next partners that we're looking for are actually folks like you, who can begin to build your own networks of users and share, experiences at a higher level with us so that we can sort of parse those and understand, as a group, how this works. Because we can't manage a sort of ever-expanding circle of describers. The logical thing will be for us to be a node in the network, that you belong to. So that's, part of the reason we're excited that Dennis asked us to
Yes.
guys.
Well, and then just, sorry, given that it is a nonprofit, right, and part of the community, how do you see this giving back to the community, right? Like, are there local groups in the accessibility community who you think would be excited to, partake in the site? And if they probably may not even know that,
I mean, part of
that
that's
this is a feature of it.
Yeah, part of that's intentional, right? So it's sort of the slow release model, work everything out. The other thing is a commitment to inclusive design and making sure it's available for everyone before we make even more noise about it.
Right.
Because, at least it's something that here, which is this idea that accessibility is great, and everybody associates me, for example, with accessibility, but it's not what it's a side effect for me. If you do inclusive design and usability correctly, you get accessibility as a side effect. And you can go to a lot of boring talks that talk about that topic for 2 hours, but the core tenet of it is actually really true. It's not just something that people say. It is true. And so I think the way that it gives back is that, to me, there's a couple of immediate problems that come to mind, right? Obvious user benefit from being able to appreciate art that was not, actually content in general that was not available to you before. But then there's participation. So going to a museum while blind and with someone else who can see, it's just like, yeah, it's totally doable. I've done it before several times, but it's not exactly my top 7
Right.
good
Not the
activities.
experiences.
Right, but then there's the participation on the other end that Susan and Anna were talking about, curators really getting back of it and realizing that the museum is actually part of the community and really wanting to give back in that sense. And then I think it's allowing folks to be participatory in the process of making the rest of the content or world or whatever accessible, right, or accessible to them. And that's a big thing for me, involving end users. So like not only having them read descriptions, but you could imagine later on almost a Reddit style voting interface, right? Where you can vote up and down descriptions, because if you're going to have
Or worse,
descriptions,
are you
I just heard
or the description.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So there's things like that I think this is groundwork. So it's early days, as Susan says, but I think your question is incredibly important because it contributes back in a lot of different ways. It's not just that thing you do for one disability group.
I actually want to answer it in a different way. Because I completely agree with everything Sima says. But there's another thing for me that I think about a lot, which is that even if a blind person never reads one of our descriptions, but knows that they're there, and that the project was initiated because we wanted to support people who had vision impairment, we're sending a message to the community of the blind and vision impaired folks that we see them as creative beings. And sorry, this is very touchy-feely, but
You just gave me chills.
that you're not just, as we sometimes say, you're not just a box that we tick off, that we actually honor, your potential to do creative work and to be a person in our community of creators, which I think is something that museums haven't been doing.
Right.
And so if we put that message in the world, as I said, independent of whether or not you actually use our descriptions, that's super important. And that's sort of, I know that sounds very sort of abstract, but I think it will begin to be out there in the world. You can be an artist. We believe in you. It's stupid, but yeah.
It's absolute, and it's the work Sina and I were doing on the letter we need to write together this weekend to YouTube and Vimeo about the support for multiple audio tracks, because right now the way those interfaces work is a different, whether it's a different language community or it's a audio description needing community, they're going to be on an entirely separate conversation thread.
Yeah.
Their
Because
conversation is set aside
we've got
and not
Spanish video and
valued
English video.
in the core,
Yeah.
typically English speaking, able to whatever, engage maybe through just closed captions or whatever it is, but it's a limited scope that the video functions in. So you have all these versions of a video, I'm like, oh, I'm looking for the one with the Spanish subtitles so I can send it to my buddy, and there's a whole other conversation happening over there.
And actually, that reminded me, so that this kind of work does actually have one other strategic advantage. It has many that I've probably forgotten, but one important one that came up from what Anna was saying is that it does a very good job of highlighting barriers to folks who do want to do the right thing. We spend a lot of time in the accessibility community, sometimes commiserating and complaining about and motivating and cajoling during our day jobs about folks to get into accessibility and so forth. But I can't tell you the number of discussions I've had because I consider myself good at that part. I like going into a room of developers and be like, accessibility, you guys, totally thinking, this meeting's gonna suck, right? And let's just get it out there, and by the end of it, just getting them super passionate about it. But here's the part that is really bad. Then they go off and they'll send me an email like, so, totally stoked, went home and tried to do this thing, hacking on it on my own time, okay? Hacking on it on my own time. See, where do I put the audio description track on YouTube? Well, okay, so here's the deal. YouTube is, you mumble a little bit. And it's like, that's really frustrating. So this kind of work, highlighting those kinds of obstacles and doing something about it, is really important.
And it spins out into
It does.
everything else we do. Like, there was this moment where we were like having issues with our PDF viewer and uploading PDFs. And suddenly I was like, we're uploading all these PDFs. And we're like, oh yeah, we'll just upload them all. And I'm like, oh my God, our PDFs, they're not accessible. So I call Sina, I'm like, Sina, help.
Tomorrow, PDF train.
Yeah, tomorrow is PDF accessibility training.
Design team.
And you try to get an accessible PDF from a Mac.
You should come to training tomorrow.
And the answer is,
Seriously, you're
if you're using InDesign, we've got it about 95% done already. Because a lot of those things can be done in InDesign, and you can then export it. And the beautiful part about that is the classic problem that you're probably very familiar with, which is some people will make PDFs, and they'll go in and they'll make it accessible. They'll use Acrobat and things like that. They're going to make it accessible, and then somebody comes in and says, guys, the table of contents is wrong. And now you've lost all of those accessibility changes. So the fact here is that, in fact, I don't even think we're going to cover any any Acrobat stuff tomorrow. All of the accessibility stuff we're going to do is going to be done at the content authoring level, so that if these guys want to go in, they feel totally comfortable making content level changes because the accessibility lives with the document.
I gotta say, I can see the designers looking at that calendar invite and like,
I reminded them, and they're like, yeah.
So I was just like, see if you can make them, come into that meeting all,
Well,
Absolutely.
actually, a good consultant, just to give a pitch for Sina, the first conversation I had with our lead developer of the website, after his first phone call with Sina, he was like, it's gonna be really intense, but he had this little smile, like, it's gonna be really, I'm gonna learn a lot. Like, he was really excited about it, and that energy and the excitement of when we set them this huge task list after our WCAG evaluation, they were just like really into it.
Yeah, it was really weird actually.
Totally bizarre.
I've had that experience with developers. They are into it. You don't have to sell the developers because it is a problem to solve,
Right.
and they love that.
Right.
So
And
cool.
you shouldn't go in, like, I think what sometimes happens in accessibility is,
those are developers, by the way, we're talking to our designers.
yes.
Oh, well,
Which is
it's
a big
actually
thing.
two, I think.
Yeah, but you don't want to go in and call their baby ugly, right? And it's just like, let's do things a different way. In design, I have a buddy of mine who uses the analogy of, for designers, when you think about accessibility, they get way more, they struggle way more with it than, in my opinion, than developers do. And to me, I like to tell them, and this is from a friend of mine, actually, who's going to be leading the PDF accessibility stuff, he says to designers, think of it as working in a different medium. And if you're telling me you can't be just as creative in clay than you can be in blown glass or whatnot, that's not the case. You're going to do all of these amazing things in a different medium, and accessibility just ensures that those foundations are really usable by more people. So there's just different ways I think of talking to different audiences, or being a sociopath, I like to call it. But
Well,
I've been crossing my fingers this whole time.
it was interesting that you said calling your baby ugly. I am a UX researcher, so my job is to basically tell people that their baby is ugly.
right?
In a nice way.
Oh, you have the coyote, so.
Yeah.
I have when I first started hearing your presentation, coming from higher ed, I'm thinking of how to help all students get through an art history class. Okay, so I wasn't thinking of it necessarily as being a pleasant experience. Like you're talking about going to a museum with a sighted person, and it's not what you do for fun, but
Right.
if you have to learn the stuff. so that's how I started thinking about this, but now I'm thinking of, you are aiming for these descriptions to be their own works of art.
Yes.
Yes.
Not art history, but their own works of art.
Yes.
And I think that's cool.
Thank you. We didn't know that would happen, and so that's just a great surprise of this project.
Dennis, how are we doing on time?
Actually, I was gonna ask you, because you guys have had an unbelievably long day. So when you guys are ready to raise the white flag, let us know. But did you have a question earlier?
Oh, you did.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I cut you off.
I'm awful with names, so.
Wait.
Yeah. I'm glad you actually said that you're incorporating other, the general population and not just for screen readers. Because
Yes.
most time, people think of accessibility as
That's right.
if it meets screen reader needs, then it's accessible.
Yeah.
Not true.
Yeah.
I actually had a discussion/argument with a former president of the National Federation of the Blind, and that was his concept. If you can interact with it with a
Right.
screen reader, then it's fully accessible.
Yeah.
Not true.
Right.
So they missed a lot of things, so I'd like to know what other accessibility features or functions that you incorporated into the website beyond the descriptions and.
Yeah, so, so two things. The first is that if you look at WCAG, there's 4 foundational principles there, right? Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, right? The POUR principle. And there are a lot of different groups or users that you can encompass with a lot of the things there. So for example, color contrast is very important. Low vision is an incredibly large population. Keyboardability for those who can't use a mouse, right? So I'm not talking screen readers here, just regular keyboardability and intelligent keyboarding. That doesn't just mean you can tab to everything, because we have, 10,000? Is that right?
Yeah.
10,000 images. Sometimes there's pages, there's pagination in the system, but sometimes you might have 1,000 links on the page or something like that. So intelligent keyboardability, really thinking about that process. With respect to cognitive, we've done a little bit of work on the back end with respect to just the amount of words on the screen. Something we're struggling with a little bit is, look, do we truncate and then do we have more buttons? And then there's antithetical use cases there, right? Or at least traditionally orthogonal use cases. For example, if you have a more button, then what do you do for blind users, right? And there's a couple of tricks. We don't have to. I'm not going to bore you with the details, but there are things you can do to make it easier for narrow vision, like field of view, narrow field of view for low vision. Also for folks who are on cognitive impairment spectrum, where you might want less text on the screen, but then also not to force more keyboard strokes, not only for the sighted keyboard user, but also for the blind user. Let's see here, what else? We've done a little bit of thinking around this idea that if you are kind of goes into keyboard, but mainly I'm thinking of switch users, so things like scripted content links, but also scroll back up, so jump links in the middle of the page, especially with pagination, something that I've been struggling with a little bit, because it's a hard one. Again, going back to this idea of having it be just as good for keyboard users, just as good for screen reader users. The way I tend to look at it is it's an ever-increasing net. I think I said this earlier today. It's an ever-increasing net, and the trick is every time you want to add, just fail forward. Failing, awesome. Iterating, great. Fail forward. But make sure that when you do that, you do a check. You circle back and you say, did we do something that took away from another user group that we were doing really well with? And that doesn't always mean just aligning with WCAG. WCAG is awesome, and a lot of people who worked on it, and I kind of go around preaching it and using it all the time. But it's not the end all and be all. There's plenty of great principles sometimes that aren't encapsulated there that you can also take advantage of. Does that answer your question?
Yes, follow-up comment, because you can actually take away from one challenge by trying to address another. So color contrast is something that you mentioned, which actually is a challenge for a lot of people because they don't use enough contrast, and so therefore you can't distinguish foreground from background, basically your text to your background. However, then some people take it to the extreme and they said, well, we'll just make it pure black text on pure white background.
Right.
Now you've lost a lot of people that have certain cognitive challenges, such as dyslexia.
Sure.
Yet, so in that aspect, people just decide, okay, well, we'll just make it a maximum. Well, now you've made it more challenging for another group.
So I think we've been pretty lucky here not to have, so I'm very well acquainted with the polarizing scenario that you're laying out, because I've had to deal with that a lot. It's the, oh wow, this is gonna be great, let's just go totally to black and white. That's what we're gonna do, fine, we're gonna have no color. We're lucky here not to have that sort of attitude about things, but I kind of want to address your overall point. Oftentimes, and this is totally, I'm not stating this as a well-researched principle, but it's my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. The answer to a crossroads of multiple usability features in which one is orthogonal to the other is sometimes resolved, at least, by offering the user customizability that is stateful. And so what that means is that if you have a website in which the color contrast can be monochromatic or color, and then let's just for the sake of argument say 4.5 to 1, it's just not that hard to actually make the few lines of CSS change and store them as a radio button choice. They get stored for that user as a cookie. And those are the kinds of things that I feel address some of those things and take it out of the realm of, oh, this is impossible, into customizability, some basic usability, and then the ability to always, if you have that choice, giving the user, this goes back to the 7 principles of universal design, giving the user a very easy way of returning back to the original starting point. So if they don't like that thing, or maybe one day they need it to be black and white, but another day, a lot of folks with vision impairment will tell you, their vision's not constant from day to day. Sometimes they use, I have some friends who use a screen reader only for some days, and other days they use large print, and that's okay. So having those choices be user modifiable, I feel is an important way of solving that problem, or at least a step into solving that problem.
We have a ton of users, if anybody has actually looked at our site, we would love to be able to customize by turning off the grid.
Yes. Yeah.
And, someday we'll convince our developer to solve that.
That actually, that tees up a second side to this, is that we're operating within a design seat that was already created.
Right.
And
That
so,
sounds familiar.
so there were
But a really, really rather aggressive.
very rigid.
Yeah.
Very rigid. And so, that was one of the things I remember Susan saying from the beginning was, if we're going to carry this, we've got to go even beyond, because this site looks the way it does and is going to look the way it does, and that our font is the way it is. And
There were certain things that were invariable, right? You always have those in projects, and that's just the reality. But again, I feel like customization can help that after the fact.
But as just the work that our developers have done and our designer has done with you, our developer designer team, have made them more sensitive, even to the sort of front-facing,
Agreed. Yes.
design aspects.
Yeah.
Have you done any usability testing with people yet?
Yes. So low vision, cognitive, keyboard only but sighted, fully blind. I think I'm missing 2. Hard of hearing for captions and a couple of other things. There's not too much sound other than the video content, so that one was somewhat straightforward. I'm missing 1.
There will be sound, however.
Fair. And along the WCAG functional criteria docs was the overall basis for that, with a few more usability things thrown in. And that was also cross-cultural. That's what I was missing. So we had folks evaluate this website. I'm going to totally miss places. A few different states in the United States, Ireland, London, some folks up in Toronto, Vancouver. It's been a really long day, and a couple of other places as well. And that helps a lot as well, because you'll pick up on some things where accessibility and internationalization come into play, and those are things to be aware of. Even if it's simple things like just how you display time and making sure that's marked up correctly, to the browser to display it, to indicate this is a time field, this is a date field. Other things like that have back-end implications as well.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm gonna be the mean one and say,
You're so
that
mean.
is, I know, well, hey, that's the worst thing I've been called today, so. I want to thank Susan, Sina, and Anna for their time today and for sharing their experiences with the website. I think they all deserve a big round of applause. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
The only thing I'll add to this, which is totally unrelated to this, is when you get home or whenever you feel like it, please go back to the meetup site for this. Please rate it and please provide feedback. You know, was this helpful? Was it not? Was it missing something? More from the meetup side rather than the content side. Okay? Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.